Here's my Communications 101 informative speech by Jaymeson Dremler about the 1968 election. Here are my audience members. They cannot come in live, sadly, well, live in person, but I hope this will do. The election of 1968 was one of the most chaotic in American history, reflecting a time that was in many ways equally chaotic. This quote from PBS perfectly sums up the mood of the nation in turmoil. The year 1968 was marked by assassinations, riots, and protests, a year when the optimism of the early 1960s gave way to fear, anger, and disillusionment. In the middle of it all came out the most consequential American presidential election in American history. Today I'll inform you about the key aspects of the 1960 election. First, the background and turmoil leading up to it. Second, the campaign and its main candidates. And finally, the election's result and lasting impact on American policies. Number 1. Background: a nation in crisis. To understand the 1968 election, you have to understand the chaos that defined that year. By 1968, the Vietnam War had become one of the most diverse issues in America. The U.S. had more than 500,000 troops deployed overseas, and the war was costing thousands of lives every month. The Tet Offensive in January that year shocked Americans, showing that victory was far from near. Televisions brought up images of burning villages, body counts into living rooms every single night, eroding faith in government officials who insisted the U.S. was winning this war. At the same time, the civil rights movement was reaching a breaking point. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was just assassinated in April, sparking riots in over 100 cities. Only 2 months later, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, who had just won the California Democratic primary, was also assassinated. The country felt leaderless. President Lyndon Johnson, worn down by criticism and unrest, made a stunning announcement in March. He would not seek re-election. His withdrawal opened a fierce battle within the Democratic Party. Anti-war candidate Eugene McCarthy inspired young activists, while Vice President Hubert Humphrey entered the race as the establishment choice. By the summer, Americans were angry, divided, and uncertain about the nation's future, and that set the stage for one of the most dramatic political contests in modern history. Part 2. The campaign: Nixon, Humphrey, and Wallace. While the general election campaigns began, 3 men emerged as the major contenders: Richard Nixon, Hubert Humphrey, and George Wallace. Richard Nixon, who had lost the presidency in 1960 and the California governorship in 1962, was making a comeback. He presented himself as a calm, experienced leader who could restore order. His message was simple: after years of protest, war, and social upheaval, America needed stability. Nixon spoke directly to what he called the silent majority, ordinary Americans who felt ignored by political elites and disturbed by the country's direction. His slogan, "Law and Order," became a promise to end the violence and chaos that people saw in nightly news. Hubert Humphrey, Johnson's vice president, faced an uphill battle. Although personally he was respected, he was tied to the unpopular Vietnam policies of the Johnson administration. Many young voters saw him as part of the establishment they wanted to change. At the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, protesters demanded an end to the war, and when police violently cracked down, the images of tear gas and brutality broadcast nationwide national party that symbolized a Democratic Party at war with itself. Meanwhile, former Alabama Governor George Wallace launched a third-party campaign with the American Independent Party. Wallace appealed to the Southern and working-class white voters who opposed desegregation and resented social change. He promised to stand up to hippies, rioters, and pointy-headed intellectuals. His running mate, Air Force General Curtis Lee May, even suggested using nuclear weapons in Vietnam, which frightened many voters but energized others who were often frustrated with the policies in Washington. Throughout the fall, Nixon maintained a narrow lead. Humphrey began to close the gap after publicly calling for a bombing haul in Vietnam, but the damage from the Democratic split was already done. Behind the scenes, Nixon's campaign was accused of interfering with peace negotiations in Vietnam, an allegation that would become more controversial years later. By election day, the nation was exhausted, ready to choose anyone, who could bring stability. Part 3. The results and their legacy. On November 5th, 1968, Richard Nixon won the presidency with 301 electoral votes, compared to 191 for Humphrey, George Wallace carried 5 southern states, earning 46 electoral votes. This is the strongest showing by a third-party candidate in over 50 years. But the popular vote told a different story. Nixon beat Humphrey by less than 1% fewer than half a million vote out of 3 million, 73 million cast. It was also an incredibly close election. However, the consequences were enormous. First, it marked a major political realignment. Many white Southern Democrats shifted to the Republican Party for the first time, a change that would reshape American political map for generations. Nixon's Southern strategy, appealing to voters who opposed civil rights measures without using overtly racist language, became a foundation of Republican policies for decades. Second, the 1968 election deepened the divide between generations and ideologies. Young people who had marched for peace and civil rights felt alienated from mainstream politics. Older Americans, meanwhile, rallied around Nixon's promise of order. The generational tensions didn't disappear. It carried forward into debates over culture, race, and government that still exist today. Finally, 1968 showed that the power of television and media in shaping elections. For the first time, millions watched political conventions, protests, and violence unfold live. What people saw on TV didn't inform them, it changed how they feel about politics altogether. Finally, the conclusion. So what does the 1968 election really teach us? It reminds us that elections don't happen in isolation. They reflect moods, fears, and hopes of their time. In 1968, Americans were desperate for leadership, torn between change, tradition, and protest and peace. Nixon's victory symbolized public longing for control, but also revealed how deeply divided the country has become. In many ways, those divisions over race, class, culture, and trust in government still echo today. The 1960 election was not just a contest for the presidency, it was a turning point in American identity. It showed how American political movements can rise from chaos, and how democracy, even in crisis, finds a way to move forward.